Hello everybody, whoever's listening. This is a special class on Likutei Torah from the Alter Rebbe on parashat Eikev. And the first thing in parashat Eikev is a mimer called Likutei man lemanu diacha. It's a mimer that deals with the man. And actually that's not the real topic. The real topic is what tshuva is and how tshuva is different than learning Torah. That is in a synopsis of the whole mimer. The Rebbe once talked about the maimarim in Likutei Torah and Dvarim, and he mentioned that all of the maimarim from parashat Vayeschanan, from Shabbos Nachamu, they all deal with tshuva. So this mimer is probably one of the strongest in that respect. And so if you have it in front of you, let's begin. The pasuk says that Hashem gave you the man to eat in order to give you a certain consciousness, in order to give you a certain das. And das we usually translate as a type of consciousness, and we'll see in a moment what exactly the Alter Rebbe means. He begins like this: Hine amanu b'chinat tal, k'mo shekatuv atal shichvat atal, v'hu tal she'altid lachyot bo et hamitim. So he says, when the man came down, it came down with tal, meaning dew underneath it, and with a layer of dew over it. So basically it was like a sandwich, enclosed within dew underneath and dew above. This dew, says the Alter Rebbe, based on the Medrash, is the same dew, the same tal, with which Hashem will reincarnate the deceased, Tchias HaMeisim, in the future. And this dew is also called, especially in Kabbalah as we'll see, is also called the aspect of Rachamim Rabim, the great mercy of Hashem. Now this is a concept that if you're a Lubavitcher, you've met a lot of times, because when you write a pan, when you write a request for from the Rebbe to intercede on your behalf. So the pan usually starts, and basically this was copied from how the Rebbe wrote his, and how apparently the Friediger Rebbe wrote his panim. It begins with the words Leoreh Rachamim Rabim, that we're asking the Rebbe, his getting involved on our behalf is by awakening great mercy. So this concept of Rachamim Rabim has a very exact understanding in Torah. It's not just that I'm saying that there's little mercy and great mercy. Like all the different nomenclature used in Chassidus, Rachamim Rabim refers to a particular aspect of mercy, of compassion. And we'll see in a moment what that is. And it says, K'ma'amar mechayem metim b'rachamim rabim. And we use this exact same phrase, Rachamim Rabim, when we daven. And in the Shmoneh Esrei, the second bracha, the bracha that is Mechayem Etim, that has to do with the reincarnation of the deceased. So there we say, Mechayem Etim Rachamim Rabim. Hashem brings back those who have passed away with Rachamim Rabim, with the same great mercy. This obviously is also related to as we'll see, our present state. Saying something that the Rebbe is going to say, the Alter Rebbe is going to say later in the Maimer, but I think it's important to understand it straight away, is that when we're talking about reincarnation, we're not only talking about physical reincarnation. It's true that that's one of the strongest aspects of reincarnation, but maybe it's not so relevant to us, but it is. Why is it relevant to each and every one of us? Because in a certain sense, we're all not exactly alive. Maybe not exactly dead, but not exactly alive. And to be not alive means that a person is suffering from trauma, from whatever is causing life to seem and to be not really alive, not really full of life. To bring that life force back into our lives is described in Chassidus as being the same type of gift from Hashem, from God, that is like reincarnating the dead. So in a certain sense, we're being brought, and the Alter Rebbe later will say it much more strongly than how I just said it now, but I'm saying it this way so that to lean into this mimer. Okay, and again, this has to do with tshuva, because in the end, tshuva is supposed to be a mechanism by which we bring the Rachamim Rabim back into our lives. We bring the life force back into our lives. ולהבין מהו בחינת רחמים רבים למעלה. In order to understand what this concept of Rachamim Rabim is referring to above, meaning in the spiritual realm, הנה כתיב וזרעתי את בית ישראל זרע אדם וזרע בהמה. There's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu that says that Hashem created the Jewish people in such a way that we are both, we include, the people itself includes souls that are like animals and souls that are like humans. This is an image that you have to get used to. In Chassidus, it's a very common image, because the moment you learn Tanya, you learn that we all have both an animal soul and a divine soul. So even though in other places, especially in Parshas Mishpatim in Torah, or when the Alter Rebbe discusses this pasuk, this verse, "V'zarati bet Yisrael zera adam v'zera behema," that there are both human-like souls and animal-like souls. Though there he discusses it in the sense that there are different types of people. In this mimer, he's really talking about that in each one of us, this is more like the Tanya, in each one of us there is a divine soul which is similar to a human soul. That's how it's described. It's being a mensch, being a person. And there's also an animal soul in each one of us. So really what he's saying here, he's taking this verse and he's saying this relates to each one of us as an individual. You don't have to look at the entire people and say there are people, tzaddikim, that are like the souls of humans, and there are people, beinonim, the intermediates, or less than that are like souls of animals. Really in each one of us this dichotomy exists, and we're constantly fluctuating between these two identities that we have, between being a human soul and being an animal soul. In the Tanya, he relates the human and animal aspect in each person, not so much in the sense of how we serve Hashem, even though that's where it goes to in the end. He more describes it as a state of being. In this mimer, as we'll now see, he describes it as being manners of service, or how we relate to God. There is a way of relating to God that is more human-like, and there is a way of relating to God that is more animal-like. Now, before we jump to conclusions, we'll see that it's not exactly what you might think right away. In general, everything in Likutei Torah, the level that the Alter Rebbe is speaking at is very high. He's not going to say something like the animal aspect of a person is lowly because ABC. He's going to describe these as manners of serving God, which are very lofty. And maybe not everybody will even relate to what he describes here as an animal soul and how it relates to God. But I think that we'll be able to explain in such a way that it will be relevant to all of us. So he says like this, what do they mean? Pirush, sheyesh shnei minei neshamot, b'chinat adam, b'chinat behema. Like we said, there's two types of souls. There's an aspect of human souls and an aspect of animal souls. V'uvan zeh, in order to understand this, like we said, he's going to take the concept of human and animal from a very high place. How high? He's going to take it all the way from the vision of the chariot that Ezekiel has in the first chapter of his book. And there, if you recall, Ezekiel sees God's chariot. And what do we mean by chariot? We mean that there is something that is a chariot, meaning a vehicle, a vessel, in which godliness is conducted or brought to be revealed in the world. The concept of the chariot is very central to all of mystical thinking in Judaism. It's very central to Hasidus. Let me say a few words about the chariot before we continue, just to get us into the notion. Because sometimes when people think about a chariot, that God is on a chariot, it becomes very what we call megusham. Megusham is like that you have a physical picture of God somehow, that somehow he's riding around in a chariot. Obviously that runs contrary to the whole grain of Judaism, which is that God has no, like the Rambam says, Maimonides says, he has no body, and he's not a force in the body, he's something else. He's removed, he's beyond anything that we experience as physical beings. He's not the opposite of physical, but you can't treat him as physical. And this vision of a chariot is very problematic because it seems to be so physical. So to understand the chariot properly, I think that the best way is to, first of all, note that Ezekiel sees two chariots. He doesn't just see one. He actually sees it once in chapter 1 of his book, and he sees it again later in his book. The second time he sees the chariot, he doesn't describe exactly what it looks like. Rather, he describes what it's doing. And what he describes is, and you can look at chapter 10 of Ezekiel to see this, chapters 9 and 10. He sees God riding up on the chariot, stopping above the temple, on the Temple Mount, taking a burning ember and throwing it down at the temple and burning it. It's a very strong image. What is he saying? He's saying it's God who burnt the temple. Don't think that it was the Babylonians in the time of Ezekiel. Don't think it was the Romans later on in the second temple. God decided to burn the temple. Why? Because the temple was not serving its purpose to connect us with God in the right way. But then the most important thing is that after he throws the ember in and the temple burns, God drives away, you might say, into the sunset on this chariot. What is Ezekiel trying to tell us with this vision? What was God trying to tell Ezekiel with this vision? So one of the strongest interpretations, and this is certainly the interpretations that were taken on by the mystics in Judaism, is he was telling us, even though there's no temple anymore, meaning the temple was the vehicle, that used to be the real place in which God revealed himself in the world. That was a place that was supposed to be a center of the universe, in the sense that every conscious being would direct his connection with God, his prayers to God, and the sustenance that he receives from God through the temple. This was Solomon's great prayer when he inaugurated the temple, the first temple, that the temple would serve its purpose as being a center and focal point for all spiritual seekers. And not just for all spiritual seekers, but for all connection, all the types of relationships that conscious beings would have with God. And I say specifically conscious beings because for Solomon, this didn't just include the Jewish people, of course. It included all of mankind. Anybody who has any consciousness of God would be connected to the temple and would understand that it's through the temple that the connection is conducted. But once the temple is destroyed, how can you connect to God? How can you reveal godliness in the world? Say the mystics, that's what God was telling Ezekiel when he drove off on the chariot. Study the chariot to understand, says Hashem, says God, what is a vehicle for me? Meaning, in other words, that if you as a human being can understand from the chariot what it symbolizes, you yourself can become in a sense, the temple. You yourself can become what the temple represented as a conduit for revealing godliness in the world. We have something very similar. Before the temple was built, there were people who were conduits for godliness, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the sages described them as being a chariot for God. They were chariots for Hashem. They acted as chariots. The idea of a chariot is again, take it out of the physical context, look at what it signifies, and you'll see that a chariot is just a vehicle. It's something that I ride on. It's somewhere that takes me somewhere else. And that's what God meant, that there's a connection between Him and revealed reality through the conduits of these chariots. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs, were that type of chariot. And anybody who studies the chariot, again, not in the mystical sense of trying to figure out how it works, but in translating it as Chassidus does, translating it into how the psyche should function in a proper way. When you understand that, how to serve God by learning from the workings of the chariot, how my own service should be, then you yourself become a chariot. That's basically what the message was, until the temple will be built, and then it will be a universal signifier, a universal chariot for all of mankind. So from the chariot we learn many things. So what did Ezekiel see there? And here the Alter Rebbe is going to take one small piece of the chariot and explain it to us, how this translates into our connection with God. He saw that there were particular angels there called Ofanim, and they're called Ofanim apparently because Ofan really means a wheel, but the idea here is that as it revolves you see different faces of it. Sort of like a human being, if you think about our psyche, that as we come into different situations in life, people see different faces of who we are. I don't show the same face when I'm teaching, as I show to my children, as I show to my wife, as I show to my parents, as I show to people I meet on the street. We have many faces. Every person has many faces. The same is true in our relationship with God. Remember, these angels, they're part of the chariot. They're like the wheels of the chariot somehow. So as they revolve, they're moving the chariot forward. They have four faces in general. I mean, it's kind of a wheel with maybe four spokes is one way of thinking of it, but really it's described like that as it turns, you see it in different ways. The one face is that it has the face of a lion. As it turns, you see the face of an ox. As it turns some more, you see the face of an eagle. And finally, there is the face of a human being. In this Maimer, really, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain all four faces, even though he dwells mostly on three of them, the lion, the eagle, and the human face in the chariot. And again, the point in Chassidus is always, how do I translate this into something that I can experience right now at this moment in my relationship with God, in my service of God, in my spiritual endeavors? So he says like this, ויובן זה מה שכתוב פני אריה אל הימין, שהוא בחינת אהבה. He says, the lion face that Ezekiel saw was to the right. And the right side in Jewish mysticism is always connected to love, to chesed, loving kindness, the right axis of the sfirot. And that's love. So the lion who's to the right, who's the right face of this Ofan, of this angel, he is love. But there's a big question about that, lions and love. Even though it's very important to note that even in the lions that we know in the zoo or in Africa, there's a particular trait that they have that the Zohar says that no other animal has. That when the lion and the lioness are together, woe to somebody who comes upon them. It's even considered a holy name, the combination of the lion and the lioness. It's a holy name in Kabbalah that describes the ultimate state of coupling, of being together, of love, of attachment. So the lion there is to the right, and he's about love, but the love, right, is not exactly the first thing we associate with the lion, in spite of what I just said from the Zohar. Because he says, because in another place it says that when a lion roars, who's not full of fear? Everybody becomes full of fear. The lion is the king of the animals. And he doesn't inspire love, he inspires fear, he inspires awe. So how do these two things work together? V'gam yamim noraim nikrim al shem aryeh. There's a famous and well-known acronym of Aryeh, of the word lion in Hebrew, which stands for the 4 holidays of Tishrei, the 4 holidays that we call them in the end Yamim Noraim. What are the Yamim Noraim? So the Aleph stands for, the Reish, we'll start from the Reish. The Reish stands for Rosh Hashanah. The Yud stands for Yom Kippurim. And the Hey stands for Hoshana Rabbah. Those are the holidays of Tishrei, the Reish, Yud, and Hey. Note that he didn't mention Sukkos, because Sukkos is a time of joy. But the fear and awe of God as King, as Master of the universe, that is inspired in us during those 3 holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Hoshana Rabbah, which is the 7th day of Sukkot, which is different. It's a little bit different than the rest of the days. It's also a time of joy, but it's Gilu Ber'ada. It's like being joy, but shaking in the joy, being afraid. It's joy that comes from with a sense of fear coupled together. The Aleph, the first letter of Aryeh, stands actually for Elul, for the whole month of Elul. And the month of Elul that we're beginning as I give this class, we're going to begin it in 7 days. So the month of Elul is a special month that is dedicated to the fear of God, to awakening to an awe of the Master of the universe, or that the new year is beginning, and with the new year comes judgment. So it's a very intense period of the year, the month of Elul, the final month of the year. So that's Aryeh. And another thing he says, Ki Aryeh otiot ira, and Aryeh, the letters in Hebrew can be permuted to spell the word ira, the word awe itself. So, which is it? Is the Aryeh to the right and he's love, or is Aryeh all connected to fear and awe? And now the most important thing is to say the fear and awe relate to the left axis of the Sfirot, to Ira. Ira is Gvura. They actually have the same gematria, they have the same value, they're both equal 216. Gvura, which is the leftmost axis of the Sfirot, is on the leftmost axis of the Sfirot, and Ira, which is its inner experience. So which is the line? So he says, היינו שבחינת האהבה זו של בחינת אריה למעלה הוא מבחינת התגלות גדולתו של הקדוש ברוך הוא. ולגדולתו אין חקר שלא יכול להתלבש תוך עלמין. ולכן תיפול עליהם אימת ופחד בהתגלות גדולה זו מצד המקבל שאינו יכול להתלבש בהם מבחינה זו כמו שהיא למעלה בבחינת האהבה. So he says, really, above the lion represents love, or the right side, whose essence is extension, is to reveal myself openly. That's what love is. When I love somebody else, I show my affection. Love is a revelation. The right side of the Sfirot is long, meaning it extends downwards as far as possible. So that's what the Aleph, that's what the Aryeh, what the line represents above. In terms of God that represents it, Hashem, God is revealing himself completely. By the way, that's exactly what the Alter Rebbe taught in another place, that during the month of Elul, which we said is a time of fear, but that awe, that fear of God is coupled, it comes together with God revealing himself in a way that he never reveals himself. It's the mashal, the parable that the Alter Rebbe uses to describe this is Hamelech Basadeh, is that the king goes out to the field to greet his people, but he does it outside the field, not in his palace, not following protocol the way it would normally be followed in the palace. It gives a person, on the one hand, a sense of being able to be near the king, because the king is openly revealing himself. On the other hand, when you're accosted, when you're suddenly experiencing a meeting one-on-one with the king, the feeling is one of awe. That's how these two things go together. So really, he says, what's happening? That when God reveals himself openly, we, as the ones who are the recipients of this revelation, we respond with awe. We respond by taking a step back. Taking that step back is how the lion shows up in our reality. The lion, what we really fear is this incredible revelation, this incredible opening up of the might that's in him, the strength that's in him. But it's being revealed. When somebody is contained and he doesn't show who he really is, so it doesn't necessarily cause us to awaken in fear. That's why the pasuk says, the verse that he quoted says, Aryeh yish'ag milo yira, that when the lion roars, that's when we respond with a feeling of awe. That's when we suddenly feel that we can't take this tremendous revelation of what the lion has. In the case of God's revelation, it means that when God reveals himself openly, we rescind. We take a step back. And so in us, the experience becomes not an experience of God's love. We don't answer that with love. We actually answer it with fear, with awe. And by the way, this is the topic that Alter Rebbe developed in a few places. He'll say this in a second, which is also the topic of another mimer in the Likutei Torah and Eikev. It's the mimer that the final mimer in Eikev, which is called Eretz Harim Uvkaot Limitar Shamayim Tishtei Mayim. It's another mimer that the Alter Rebbe taught about Eikev, and there it discusses this concept of a seal that protrudes, and when you put it into the wax, it causes the wax to rescind, to go back, meaning wherever the seal is sticking out, it causes an engravement in the wax. Same thing, wherever God reveals himself coming down, it causes me to go lower, to accept his revelation, and it causes me a feeling of not really being here at the moment, almost of nullification. והדרך המבואה במקום אחר ומשל מחותם בולט, נעשה לשעבה צורת חותם שוקע. כך מהתגלות גדולתו של הקדוש ברוך הוא נמשך למטה בעולמות בחינת יראה. That's what he says now. That in the same manner of the parable of the seal, wherever the seal is sticking out, that's where it causes the wax to move away. And that's the feeling that we have, that when God reveals his love, we answer, or we're affected by it in the sense of feeling fear. The exact opposite. So when he protrudes, we rescind. When he reveals himself, we feel ourselves not being able to reveal ourselves. In a sense, awe and fear are a sense of contraction. They're a sense of, I can't show myself. I have to protect myself. I have to close myself in. That's the feeling, that's the one of the definitions of what it means to be in awe. When God revealed himself at Mount Sinai, "Vayicharad kol ha'am asher b'machaneh," what did it cause? It caused tremendous fear in the people, tremendous awe. Because God is revealing himself, the result for me is that I take a step back, or more than even a step back. There they went back many miles. But it's a feeling that I can't contain this revelation. And therefore, I become full of awe and fear. So even though the lion that that Ezekiel describes to us, he says, is on the right side, that's in terms of God revealing himself. When it comes down to us, we answer this with our own awe and fear of God. The Alter Rebbe continues, וזהו עניין שירד על המזבח אש בצורת אריה דאכיל כל קורבנין. This is the reason that the sages describe that the fire that came down to consume the sacrifices placed on the altar in the temple had the shape in the first temple of a lion. What's the idea here? Again, that God is revealing himself and he's consuming the parts that were put on the altar, and especially in certain types of sacrifices, were the fats, the ishim and the chelev and the dam, the fat and the blood. What's the problem with the fat and the blood? They represent in us those things that we don't need, meaning our feeling of extension. This is one of the main themes in Chassidus, that if a person takes a good hard look at himself, he sees that a lot of what a lot of his possessions, a lot of the things that he yearns for, that he wants, that he dreams about, these are things that are not really needed for life. They're not really necessary. They're chelev, meaning they're fat. I'm adding fat to myself. I'm not living you could almost say it minimalistic, but not in the sense of asceticism, but in the sense of being able to give a reason for everything that I do, for everything that I possess. Why do I need these things in this world? Why do I? What reason do I have for them? If there are people that have to have $1 million in the bank at every single moment, why? Because of the great things that they're doing. It could be that it's a person who does tremendous acts of loving kindness. He needs that. So for him, that's not fat. But if I keep sums like that in the bank and don't do anything with it, so basically that's my fat. In terms of blood, the blood represents, especially this concept of mirutzat damim, the running of the blood, is when a person